Analysis of Frederick Douglass. The historical and political context is placed in around 1845, which was a time where slavery just 5 years earlier were at its highest point in America. At this time, it was rarely seen that any man or woman of color came forward with their criticism or opinions about the whole slavery movement. But still, it was a period of time where the idea of abolishment of slavery slowly emerged in America. The genre is an autobiography of Frederick Douglass' life, and this can be seen through the fact that it's a non-fiction story it's it's a description of his own life and experiences as a slave. The text is also written in past tense and with a first-person narrator, which also indicates it's an autobiography. Here's an example of that. I was not allowed to make any inquiries of my master concerning it, where he uses first of all I, which indicates it's a first-person narrator, and after that he uses was, which indicates it's in past tense. One of the ways Douglass argues his case is found in the progression of the text, where he starts off describing the basic things that you take for granted as a privileged white person, and this seems almost objective and nearly ripped out of emotions and just standing facts. Here's an example of that. I have no accurate knowledge of my age, never having seen any authentic record containing it, and also I do not remember to have met met any slave who could tell of his birthday. This also tells us that it's not only a problem for him, but a common problem among slaves that they just didn't know their birthday, which is incredible. Then later in the text, he switches over to a more dramatical and dramatical perspective of the whole telling of the story, where he starts telling of how miserable it was as a slave, and he starts telling us more of the more bloody details of the slave life. Here's an example of that. Her arms were stretched out to their fullest length. Her arms were stretched up at their fullest length, so that she stood upon the ends of her toes. And after rolling up his sleeve, he commenced to lay the heavy cowskin, and soon the warm red blood came dripping to the floor. Here he also uses the adjectives warm and red to describe the word blood, which also gives it a more horror feeling, and you can nearly feel it on your own skin. Yes. In conclusion, the whole progression of the text gives first of all, at the beginning it makes feels more reliable because you have this objective view on the whole situation, but also he wins the reader over at his side because he starts telling about how it is, how the horrible things happen when you were a slave, what horrible things that happened when you were a slave. Yes. He also convinces through his language, although currently in history it was nearly never seen that any man of color was able to write or read. But in addition to this, he also had a very complex language, and an example of this is right here. The whisper that my master was my father may or may not be true, and true or false it is of by little consequences to my perfect will is that there remains in all glaring odiousness that slaveholders have ordinated and by law established that the children of a slave woman shall in all cases follow the conditions of their mothers. Here we really can see he has a complex language and also a understanding of the complex words he's using. He can use this in the right context. This makes the whole text more reliable and trustworthy. And yes, he also uses a lot of pathos, and it's extremely evident that his most used appeal is pathos, but also a little ethos is used. Here's an example of that. I have known him to cut and slash the women's heads so horribly that even the master would be enraged at his cruelty and would threaten to whip him if he did not mind himself. So the main focus of using pathos is to make the reader feel something, and he really managed to do that throughout the text by using pathos, and that's also how he wins the reader over on his side.